welcome to the Onyx Pathcast. I'm one of your hosts, Eddy Webb, and with me we have Dixie Cochran.
Hello.
And Matthew Dawkins.
Greetings.
And today we're going to talk about Vampire the Requiem. This was a kind of a surprise topic that Matthew sprung on us in the middle of a previous episode.
Matthew loves throwing curveballs during interviews or during episodes. He just likes to throw things at people.
Well, you know, it keeps things exciting, keeps us on our toes. We can't afford to become complacent.
Well, that's the sign of a good relationship in general, is that you're always spicing things up and keeping things entertaining. For those people who feel that we over-plan these episodes, one, clearly you've not listened to all of our episodes. Two, this is absolutely not true. We walk in with like, we're going to do this, that'll be fine. And then just see what happens after an hour. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. But
it's always great. Thank you.
Well, you are always great. Matthew and I, a little more muddy.
Yeah. Yeah. Shades of quality there, to be honest. No plan survives contact with an in-house developer of Onyx Path Publishing, but especially when we're hosting a podcast.
Exactly.
But no, I'm happy with the way things have been going, and I'm glad to have sprung this on both of you. The idea. To
be fair, I think it will be a cool conversation, because you're right. It's something we've never really done before, aside from occasionally at shows. We really kind of dig into a particular game, and this one turns out is pretty good because we're all coming at it from different perspectives. So I think we should start with kind of talking about what our different perspectives are. So Matthew, since you're the person who came up with this idea, what's your relationship with Requiem 2nd Edition?
Well, I'll go back a little bit further and say that I can remember the day that I purchased Vampire the Requiem and the World of Darkness book for New World of Darkness when it first came out. I remember actually queuing at the local game store, which was called Hidden Fortress in Southampton on the south coast of England. And when I bought Requiem, I took it to the local Debenhams, which is like a department store, sat in the cafe there and just read it. And loved it, and was then blown away probably a few years later when I really started getting into online debates, when I noticed people thought, this is quite similar to Masquerade, because I had been on a Masquerade kick for many years. And
I'm shocked.
Yeah, can you believe? And so when I picked Requiem up, because I was so invested in Masquerade, I saw a wholly different game. And maybe that means I'm quite blinkered, because I know there are an awful lot of people that do complain, and I think that it's a fair criticism that of all of the Chronicles of Darkness games, Requiem was, at least at first edition, the one that was the least removed from its World of Darkness originator. So, Wealth of Forsaken, completely different cosmology. Mage the Awakening takes a wholly different track to Mage the Ascension, and so on and so forth. Requiem, there was a lot of similar terms. There was a lot of, and of course the storytelling system. There were some similarities there, but when you get to Requiem 2nd edition, I feel that criticism from First Ed, where those comparisons were so readily being made, can be completely put away. You can box it, you can put it in a wardrobe with Eddy Webb, and you can just say that Requiem 2nd Edition is its own game. This is Vampire standing on its own 2 feet and saying, we're making a bold statement. This is street-level Vampire. This is personal horror. This is sex and blood. And as the name was, before we change it to Requiem 2nd Edition, it's blood and smoke. It's a game that is rich in atmosphere to me. And that's the thing that really grabs me. When I read Requiem 2nd Edition or write it, I don't have to be purple with my prose, which is a term you get when someone is using far too many adverbs and adjectives in their writing, and metaphors and similes. Right. But when you read Requiem 2nd Edition, or at least when I read Requiem 2nd Edition, and when I play it, when I run it, it feels like an immersive world. It's got this dark, paranoid, atmosphere where the hierarchy in your city, which it tends to be divided between the 5 primary covenants, are jockeying for position, both over your minds and your souls, essentially. And I like that because it provokes more diplomatic play, more social maneuvering, which of course is a mechanic we might get onto in this podcast, depending on where things naturally take us, than the game this one's most commonly compared to, Masquerade, which of course is usually one of several columns. You're either in the Camarilla, or you're in the Anarchs, or you're in the Sabbat. In this, you can have a group that's comprised of a Ventru in the Invictus, a Gangrel that's in the Circle of the Crone, a Mechet that's in the Lancair et Sanctum, and so on. So, wow, I'm really rattling on now, sort of waxing lyrical.
So what I'm getting is that you're deeply understanding and invested in Vampire the Requiem.
All right, you cut me off. Cut me off, Eddie, while I'm in my stride. Why the hell not? But no.
You have a lot to go into, because I'm curious to hear what Dixie's perspective and relationship.
Absolutely. So yes, I'll shut up for the time being. For the time being.
You're getting into so much that I was like, is he just gonna get into the meat of the entire episode
I felt that if I had carried on, I would have probably been crying and accepting my Oscar about 3.5 minutes later. So you probably stopped me at a good point. Let's not explode too early.
So my introduction to Requiem, first edition, actually took place when I was living in Atlanta and socially seeing one of the people in charge of it. So it was a game they were working on, and they gave me some of the clan book. So I actually was reading, like, I think I read clan book Deva first. Was my first ever introduction into it. Aside from this, I'm not gonna lie, I was one of those people that when I first heard about it, I was a little salty, because I was hearing about it from my other Masquerade friends, and all of them were just going like, they're changing everything, they're getting rid of all of our clans, blah, 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 because I hadn't really, like, dived into bloodlines and things at that point. And as somebody who played a lot of Malkavians in Vampire the Masquerade, all that I was seeing at first was, oh god, they got rid of my clan. Oh god, what do I do?
Oh, like, yeah.
I'm so confused. And
what is this Malkavia thing? What the hell?
Yeah, and like I can't be a Deva and also do that, but I want to be pretty, like I had all these problems. And they were born of lack of research at the time, to be perfectly honest. Because I didn't go pick it up because nobody in my group at the time was super interested in playing a different version. They wanted to keep playing Masquerade, and I was like, okay, cool. So then later, when I did pick up some of the books and read them, this was probably in 2008, maybe. I actually really, really loved it. I like a lot of the changes. I like the idea of bloodlines. I like that every overarching clan has 20 bloodlines you can choose from if you want to, or you don't have to have one. And now, since I am the in-house developer who kind of is in charge of Chronicles of Darkness, I do really care about it. I love second edition. I agree with Matthew in that I think it was a really great departure, because first edition did have those criticisms, but second edition, I think it is a wholly different game. Almost anybody that you see talk about the differences will talk about the difference between like personal horror and like world-spanning politics. Or, do you want to play a small, intimate game? Do you want to actually have to confront the idea of humanity? Which in Masquerade, technically you're supposed to, but I don't remember any game that ever did. I also like the difference between, I was saying before the podcast, between generation and blood potency, because, generation is something that you're kind of, on some level, I mean, you can get around it, but on some level stuck with, and blood potency goes up, but then there are drawbacks, and actually having a system for, drawbacks related to you getting further away from being human, I think is a really interesting idea of the vampiric struggle. So now that I'm charged of it, I can't say I've read every single book, because there are like 30 something of them out if you include all the first edition ones.
Right.
But
a lot of books.
Right. But I do really, really love the game as a whole. So, Eddie, what about you?
And from my perspective, I've been involved with Requiem, both first and second edition, but mostly as a person who either develops ad hoc projects or someone who writes on them, a lot of my exposure has actually been through live action. I played a lot of live action Requiem, which is predominantly drawn from the first edition interpretation. In fact, one of my characters, Rose, without me knowing, injected into one of the books, and I found out after I got the print proof when we were both at CCP. And I was like, "Wait a minute, this is my character!" I walked into her office, and she's like, "Yep, totally stole it." So I mean, but a lot of that came from I have a lot of my interest and a lot of my exposure to it is from the kind of the social dynamics of it. A lot of the how do covenants differ from sects, and how the clans work differently, and how the bloodlines work within the clans.
Right.
And then when second edition came around, I know right around Rose started thinking about Blood and Smoke, and then second edition was around the time we decided that 20th anniversary of Masquerade was going to be more of a line. And so with me kind of shepherding Masquerade and Rose shepherding Requiem, we ended up having a lot of discussions about how these games are distinct. And it was interesting that we were largely on the same page for a lot of it, even though my exposure to Requiem was not really from the design side until we were in that situation. It was just more, okay, this is either I'm playing it or these are set materials that I have to then derive from to work on things. So I mean, it's for me, it's interesting because I don't know second edition as much. I know this is full confession, cards on the table kind of thing. When I'm asked to write on a project, I have learned the art of heavy skim research.
Yeah.
So it's like I need to read the sections that I need to reference for my material, and then I'll skim other related topics just so I know how it all fits together. But I don't read the whole book. Usually don't have the time to read the whole book because I've got a lot of other things on my plate, or at the time is really tight on the project. When I'm a developer, I will read a lot more, but I haven't developed any second edition Requiem projects. So my knowledge of it was, okay, recently I've just been kind of going through and going, oh, hey, I now recognize how this bit fits into that bit. But my knowledge of second edition is actually probably the weakest of the three of us, even though my knowledge of Requiem as a concept in a world might be a little more in-depth.
Right.
So it's an interesting place to kind of be.
Well, I mean, if we're going full disclosure, cards on the table, I've never gotten to play Vampire the Requiem, ever. I've never gotten involved in a game, whether LARP or tabletop. And that's partially, like I said, because at the time, the gaming group I was playing with when it was first released was just not at all interested. And since then, I've just had a spotty track record being able to find gaming groups. I've never really, dived into the world of online tabletop playing, which I probably should, because I enjoy tabletop role playing, and I just don't get to do it that often. Yeah. But yeah, I've never gotten to play. I've read a ton of the books, and I've edited a lot of the 2E materials. So I am familiar with the world, familiar with the systems. I edited the Chronicle of Darkness 2nd edition rulebook, so I'm very familiar with a lot of the mechanics. But I definitely, have not ever gotten to actually play any of the characters that I have thought of while reading the books. Because whenever you're reading them, you're always like, I would play this, I would play that.
Oh, totally,
and
especially if it's done well. You're inspired by the material.
Yeah, and I've thought that a million times with every single clan and covenant and whatever, and it's just like, no, I hadn't never got to play.
And I hadn't even heard of Requiem until today. So I guess that's the end of our podcast. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
You're trying to make me feel better.
We're just gonna delete the first 25 minutes of this podcast of Matthew rambling.
I could just interchange some words, and that could be about any book. No, my experience of Requiem is both as a storyteller and as a player. And when it came out, especially when it came out, my group was all too amenable for switching from Masquerade. And it's fine. I know a lot of conversations about Requiem do linger on this, so we won't try and do it for too long about the differences between Requiem and Masquerade. But I think the reason it worked so well for my group was because we really focused on the differences.
Right.
We didn't linger on the similarities, or the similarities that were there we just kind of took as read. So, they exist. We'll incorporate them. The difference is, though, wow, look, these are new ways of playing vampires. These are new curses. These are new banes and what have you. And it's funny because that group, which I hadn't played with for probably about 3 years before second edition came out, we all got in touch around the time second edition came out, and God Machine Chronicle came out, and said, well, when Requiem 2 comes on the scene, shall we sort of have a reunion, update our characters, update the story? And so we did, and we had a good 4 or 5 month chronicle, which updated everything to second edition, which was fantastic. It really helped me as a writer, because it meant that I could become immersed in both universe and rules, because oftentimes the easiest way to learn a system is by playing it, at least for me. But it really embedded in my mind the differences between the editions. So yes, I guess of the three of us, I probably have the greatest familiarity with the game.
It's likely, yeah. I once again, I don't want to get too heavy into differences, but my group was very much, young American guys that mostly were just like, they got rid of Kane, they got rid of Metaplot, and they just didn't like that. And I was more than willing to try something new, but yeah, they weren't. And like I said, I kind of let their salt season my opinion at the time. So it wasn't until I came at it differently when I was like, oh, this is actually really good.
It is funny though, isn't it? Because my group did have that same issue. It's why are they calling the Malkovians now? Those bastards. They think we won't notice. They've knocked the H off of Bruja. And yet, after that initial saltiness, as you describe it, everyone had a lot of fun adapting their favourite masquerade disciplines and clans and bloodlines into becoming bloodlines for Requiem.
Right.
And I remember one member of the group in particular being utterly disappointed when the San Giovanni were introduced in one of the Bloodlines books. I think it's Bloodlines, the legendary.
Sounds right.
After he had painstakingly adapted Giovanni from Masquerade and then realised the San Giovanni were better.
Oh no.
In practically every aspect. Everyone at the table said, yeah, sorry. But no, your work isn't as good as this stuff.
And that was actually one thing
but we did it in a friendly way.
That was one thing actually I found interesting to kind of close the loop on the differences. When we did the Vampire Translation Guide, originally the idea behind that was we did see a lot of people who were like, I love Masquerade, I don't know what this Requiem thing is, and they were seeing kind of they couldn't see the forest for the trees in a lot of ways.
Right.
And so initially the project was pitched like, well, we'll just do a conversion guide, a 3-page thing on the website to talk about how to convert your Masquerade characters to Requiem. And then the more I dug in, the more I realized there's so many differences once you start actually digging into the material, that it's really, you can't really do that. And so I pitched it more much like language translation. That's where the translation guide came from, was because it's like, you can't do a direct, this means the exact same thing in this other language. That's not how languages work.
Well, yeah,
and we're kind of the same boat. It's not a conversion. It's a translation.
If that were the case, then, I mean, Requiem would just be Masquerade with new terms slapped on it, which it isn't.
Right. Exactly. And so when I asked Matt McFarlane's work on that, one of the things that was interesting to me is that he really dug in and decoupled some of those concepts and found ways to kind of play in the space of both of those. Like little things like turning the Tremere into a covenant, I thought was amazing. Because the Tremere inside Requiem makes so much more sense as a covenant than as a clan.
Right.
And so you have things like a gangrel Tremere, and it's like, that sounds weird as an old school Masquerade player, but it does bring up a whole new level of interesting things you can dig into. Similarly, to kind of move into what's cool about Requiem specifically, one of the things that I particularly loved was the fact that the faux religious elements weren't in bloody opposition to the default state, but rather were integrated into it. So you could have secular religious conversations inside of it without necessarily having that be a conflict, or a physical conflict. Like with the Sabbat and the Camarilla, now you can have the Lanka Sanctum, and you could have other characters like the Carthians, the Invictus, playing with inside that space. And same with the crones. They all have a different texture, and that from a social dynamic perspective, something I really loved about Requiem from a live action thing is that you can have these really amazing conversations that are one step removed from real world conversations, but you just couldn't have equivalent conversations in Masquerade, or you couldn't have different equivalent social dynamics in Masquerade because of that strong Camarilla Sabbat Anarch divide.
Right.
The one of the games we've mentioned before, I think, well, you talked about it briefly in Ian Watson's interview, was Planescape as a D&D setting, and the reason Planescape works for me so well is because of the factions that you play, which are simply philosophical movements, and this is a term I've seen on the Onyx Path forums. Other people might use it, and I hadn't seen it until I read it on the forums. Is that in Chronicles of Darkness you have, I think people call it an X splat, so your splat being, let's say, your clan, a Y splat, so let's say being your covenant, and then potentially being your Z or Z splat, which I guess if you're using Contagion Chronicle is your faction.
Or it's your kith or your bloodline.
Exactly. So Requiem automatically provided more layers in that respect and more diversity in your character options, because I love the idea of having your to use the archetypes, the Ventru Invictus and your Gangrel Acolyte from the Circle of the Crone in the same coterie, because they can have philosophical debate without necessarily needing to tear each other's throats out. And there've always been storytellers that have been able to do the exact same thing in Masquerade, with a Camarilla and Sabbat have to team up to fight against Infernalists or something. But the game isn't designed for them to continue working together for longer than that mission. In Requiem, life just shows you as a vampire that you need to work together in order to survive. All of you need to work together. You need to form this all-night society, as it's called in the game, to exist, to help give you purpose, to give you support mechanisms for when your touchstones, and these are probably all things we'll get onto, start falling away. Sometimes your Ventru in the Invictus is going to need a bit of spiritual aid, a bit of spiritual guidance. So it would make absolute sense for them to go towards their... Hell, you might even use the word friend in Requiem, where you would be afraid to in Masquerade, to go to them for spiritual, psychological counsel and support. And that for me makes a much more collaborative game. And I would say the same thing has fallen through all of the Chronicles of Darkness games. There's a strong emphasis on collaboration between all of the players. But it's a strength I feel Requiem has, both at a LARP and a tabletop level.
Right, yeah, I can see that. It is nice having the different layers, because I mean that's what makes your character interesting and complex. Like, even if you're all playing one, clan, you could all be in different bloodlines and covenants even. Or you're all playing one covenant, but you can be in different blood. Like, the options for how your characters interact and how your characters feel about things, and even just how your characters play, I think are a lot wider. In Requiem and in Chronicles of Darkness games in general, just because there's more options. That XYZ axis is very, very important, I think, to all of our 2E game lines.
And actually, one thing that ties into is a bit of science. There's a bit of science behind that, actually. And I'm blanking on the name, but unfortunately, there was a theorem that's been positions in psychology that if you have less choices than 3, you don't feel like you have a real substantial choice. A binary choice doesn't feel very substantial.
Right.
Whereas choices 7 or higher, it becomes overwhelming. And so in Masquerade, core Masquerade, you have the 7 clans. It's nice, and it's a nice sweet spot. But then as you start adding on things, it doesn't really... It adds more and more choice. And so the way Masquerade kind of, I think, largely unintentionally developed that was, okay, well, these 4 choices are independent and these 2 choices are Sabbat, and but as you dig in, it potentially becomes very overwhelming, especially when you're playing a Sabbat or an Anarch game where it's like, well, you could play a Bruja and a Tribu, and whatever. That's different from Bruja. Whereas with the Chronicles of Darkness games, because of the XYZ design, You can go like, cool, I'm gonna choose one of these 5 covenants, one of these 5 clans, and then one of this handful of bloodlines. And it boop, 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 and that gives you a fairly distinctive character. There's a lot of combinations that come from that design.
Yeah. Yeah, it's more of a Russian doll like character design, I suppose, than looking. I'm quite visual, I guess, in the way I map my characters, and yeah, the way you describe it, I'm guessing I see the World of Darkness as a character who is a map. So you maybe have a central hub and then various spokes running off of it, whereas Requiem is almost like and this is just my visual cues coming out my mouth now. I'm sort of seeing a body map with another body map inside it and another body map inside that, each more important at some level to let's say the soul or the spirit of the character through to their superficial face. There to use again old terms. You have your dirge and your mask in Requiem, and prior to that we had virtue and vice, and prior to that we had nature and demeanor, and we've always followed that kind of course, but I think each of the Chronicles of Darkness games, and especially Requiem, is particularly strong in that regard.
Well, and it's the one thing that, if I get slightly academic for a moment, one of the things that always interested me about all of the World of Darkness style games, both Chronicles and original World of Darkness, is that it flirts with postmodernism. The idea that you get interesting stories when you take things that are contrasting. But in the World of Darkness, the contrast comes from between games in a lot of ways. Or nature and demeanor is kind of the most in game, but like usually it's how do werewolves contrast with vampires? And what does the interstitial dynamic that comes between the version of those two games becomes interesting. Whereas World of Darkness becomes more explicitly postmodern in the sense of, okay, you can play the Ventru Invictus, but what happens if you play Gangrel Invictus? What happens when you play a Ventru Crone? How do you take those concepts that look like they should snap together easily and then go against that grain? And that gives you some, it tells you, and because it's inside the conceit of the game world, because it's a diegetic exploration, then you have some interesting exploration you can do as opposed to the kind of more largely theoretical exploration of, okay, what if a werewolf gets embraced into vampire society? That's something that's kind of explicitly in World of Darkness told, no, that's not a thing you really do. Whereas World of Darkness very much plays more in that space of there are interesting things to say by intentionally putting things that don't quite fit together and seeing what results from that.
Yeah, well, I think too, like the I don't know, the personal horror aspect of it is just so much more in the spotlight with Requiem. And with most of our 2E game lines, I mean, that's something that we talked about a little bit with Megan for Changeling 2E, is that we kind of like to, take, yes, it's a horror game, it's always been a horror game, but like there's more of a focus on like you are kind of a monster and you're trying to retain some shred of humanity. And that's reflected in the mechanics, but that's also reflected in how the game works, and how you storytell it. Is that you are trying to retain some humanity, stay close to that, be a hero sometimes, I guess, but also like there's consequences for almost all of your actions, which I think a lot of times in classic games got in Masquerade games got kind of thrown out the window in the favor of we're vampires and we're big bad guys and we're gonna run around and kill things and whatever, or do politics or whatever.
That's a nice kind of segue. You mentioned before that you've edited a lot of the stuff, so I mean, I know you don't read for retention when you're editing, but still, have you noticed what mechanics Second Edition do to kind of really emphasize that?
There's quite a few things. Even just in Requiem in general, I mean, the concept of blood potency is really interesting to me. Because generally in games, you want to get more and more powerful, and that's a good thing. And eventually you're playing God tier characters and you can do everything, or that character becomes an NPC at that point. If you want to keep playing your character though with blood potency, you hit a level where you can't drink from humans anymore, only other vampires. Right. And that's got its own consequences, because that can be an addiction, that can be all kinds of other things. And so you have to, actually go into torpor to like sink back down a little bit if you want to keep playing that character. Otherwise, that character often does become a storyteller character at that point, because they are too powerful and they're not really playable anymore.
Right.
Same with the creation of, I think, ghouls, for instance. Like, ghouls are a little bit different than they were originally. They're not just, servants that run around and do things for you. They're not just like, toadies.
Right.
It's a lot less fun to be a ghoul in Requiem.
They're more like junkies at this point.
Yeah. So yes, they can be helpful, but they are junkies. They might do things for you and they might get a little bit out of it, but you're also, screwing them over. And that can also contrast with your humanity and make you actually care about it. So yeah, no, there's quite a few mechanics that play on that. It would take a while to go through all of them. But those are two of the ones that always kind of stand out to me, is the difference between, wanting to get more and more powerful, and, you turn to Diablerie, do you turn to this, do you turn to that, or do you retain your humanity and kind of let yourself be okay? Yeah.
Well, there's one mechanic actually I do want to kind of dig into, and both of you may have a better sense of this. One of my frustrations, I think, working on V20, was that the humanity system, when it debuted, was revolutionary in the 90s. The idea that there's a mechanical exploration of your morality. The only thing that comes kind of close to my mind is Pendragon, in terms of, here are numbers that determine what kind of person you are. But in play, a lot of what happens is you kind of quickly fall to a rough middle state of about 4 to 6 dots, and you kind of just hang out there. So really, it's just the first couple dots you kind of shape. You do a few bad things because you're a bastard covered bastard. You drop a few dots, and then you find that nice comfortable spot of casual jerk. And it's like, as long as you're not kicking puppies into the sun, you really are kind of okay. So I never really felt that. And then while we've tried to implement rules, and certainly V20 kind of dig into more of that with some of the things like stealing bits from Dark Ages to kind of give penalties at the high ends and low ends, I think it ended up kind of reinforcing that you kind of just float around the middle ground. And once you hit there's not really much more you can do unless the storyteller really intentionally ratchets up to put you into harder and harder situations. In first edition Requiem, with their kind of the kind of generic morality stat, didn't quite address that problem to my mind. Because it was a better approach to it. It added some different things and also decoupled the intentionally Judeo-Christian bent of humanity from Masquerade. But my understanding is that second edition kind of takes a very different approach to morality, and specifically Requiem approaches that. You mentioned touchstones in the past, so if one of you can kind of dig into how it actually helps address that problem and make things more morally complex for characters.
Yeah, well, so in Requiem second edition, you have these things called detachment roles. This can come up in other avenues, but detachment roles are the most common, and that's where you're going to do something that's considered inhumane to some degree or other. And the more touchstones you have that can be, I guess, pulled upon to assist in your resisting detachment will provide you with bonus dice to resist detachment. Now, to decouple, to use that word, what I've just said, touchstones are most commonly mortals that mean something to your character, and they will be placed at strategic points along your humanity track. And you cannot, in theory, fall beneath your touchstone rating or your humanity unless that touchstone is gone. So if your touchstone is imperiled and, let's say, snatched away by a rival or murdered or the like, then you stand a very good risk of dropping in humanity, because one of those things that's keeping you clinging on to mortality is suddenly at risk. And if you don't have it anymore, your character may be prone to introspection and wondering, what is the point? Why am I hanging on to humanity? You may be driven into a bestial frenzy and lash out and massacre a whole bunch of people because your loved one is now dead or mutilated or what have you. So touchstones acts as a kind of a system prop that reinforces the importance of humanity, but at the same time they act is in that system way to allow you to keep humanity. Because let's say, for instance, you murder someone as a vampire in a horribly brutal way, and one of your touchstones is a witness to this, or you're doing it in order to protect your touchstone.
Right.
In that sense, you can use your touchstone to add a die to your roll, your detachment roll, to prevent you from reducing in humanity, because you're self-justifying. You're explaining to yourself, why did I do this? It's okay, I did it for them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it ties into the Requiem themes of obsession and twisted love and lust, because your touchstone doesn't have to be a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a husband, a wife. It could be a child, it could be a best friend. You can even have it as objects. It could be your gravesite, the home you grew up in. To read from the book for a sec, you've got your high school sweetheart, a terminally ill parent, a therapist you might see. You could be doing a Tony Soprano style visit with a mortal therapist as a vampire,
Mm-hmm.
and you develop that character as a touchstone, because they're the only mortal who actually knows what you're going through. And this can become even more twisted if you start desperately wanting to preserve your touchstones, because you become aware of what happens when you lose them. So now you start feeding them vitae. Now you start trying to turn them into ghouls, because you want to keep them forever. But how long will it be until your callous disregard for their humanity results in them dying horribly, or leaving you, or just disappearing as a touchstone because the person you fell in love with is no longer someone you can love? You've so addicted them to your blood that they are only with you because they need it. They're not with you because they want to be. And
so the anticipated trajectory is that the character will eventually lose those, whether from outside influences or from them self-sabotaging their relationships.
Certainly that's the way I've always played it, and that's because
Okay.
I like a tragic air to my game. Now, if you were to run a Vampire the Requiem Chronicle in a very short space of time, then certainly not. But I guess I'm coming from a vantage point of having relatively recently written for 1,000 Years of Night and Half Damned, which are two source books for Vampire the Requiem. And 1,000 Years of Night deals with characters who are, well, as the name implies, elders. How do you play vampires that are centuries in age? And Half Damned has you playing ghouls and Dampiers, half vampires essentially. And that shows two very interesting shades of the vampire experience that you may not get from just reading Requiem second edition. Both are particularly dark and horrible books in places, but they shine a brilliant light on the importance of these touchstones. So yeah, I think for me, and it's no great secret, I'll mention this now, it's no great secret that Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, at least at time of recording, is adapting touchstones to its core system. And it isn't because they're just liberally stealing a mechanic. It's because they acknowledge, yes, this is a fantastic way of emphasizing the importance of humanity and the importance of humans to a vampire.
Absolutely.
And that they acknowledge that the humanity track in Masquerade ultimately became quite arbitrary. It's just a meter for resisting this or that. But as soon as you start inserting mortals into the mix, or places of importance, it grounds your character. It makes them more embedded in the world around, rather than all I know is vampires and the vampire scenes I habituate. Now it's, which mortals do I hang around with? Who do I influence? Who do I need to protect?
And I think that's an interesting point. To briefly switch on the Masquerade, but in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, one of the things that people consistently tell me about that video game is the game gets compelling when you get your first ghoul, when you find that character and bring them into the world of darkness, as it were, and the horror that they go through, and the control you have over that character.
Heather, isn't it? I think
really sets the tone for what kind of vampire you're going to be in that game. And so that's one thing that's always kind of frustrated me about some of the classic systems, is because when you're doing a 20th anniversary edition, the goal is not to rewrite the game. The goal is to present the game that people remember and love. And so that's one of the reasons why when Rose and I were working in parallel, a lot of times I'd be going, I can't really change this too much. And then Rose would be like, oh, cool. Well, I'm doing this completely awesome thing over here in Requiem. And it's like, that's cool. That's great, But it is nice to see the cycle of development kind of continue, because it's how much of Masquerade initially is because of the 90s era game design, how much of it is because it's inherent to the property is intriguing to me. And I think it's an interesting analogy also to the conversion from first to second edition Requiem. A lot of things people assumed were sacred cows turned out not to be the case in second edition. Like Dixie, like you pointed out, Requiem kind of becomes its own beast in second edition, where it was really more, it felt like a bit like a Masquerade knockoff in the first round.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that I like about Requiem, and that we were talking about kind of with the whole ghoul thing, is that it's largely about relationships. It's about your relationship to your, fellow kindred. It's about your relationship to mortals. It's about your relationship to your own self and the self that you were before you became a vampire. Pardon me. That's something that we do a lot in, like I said, that's kind of a thing in Changeling as well. But yeah, I think Requiem does it really, really well, where if you're playing it kind of as it's written, then you do have to acknowledge all these things. You have to acknowledge the person you used to be, and you have to acknowledge any relationships you used to have, and you have to acknowledge, any relationships that you form after you become a vampire, and all of them influence you, and all of them influence your humanity and how you interact with the world. And also, I mean, that's why we have breaking points in 2e, because sometimes you might have to do something that you really shouldn't be doing or don't want to do, or that will mentally hurt you. And that causes a breaking point, and you have to...
We haven't actually talked about breaking points. Can you break that down a little bit? No pun intended.
Possibly. I'm really bad at explaining mechanics.
That's
really
fine.
good at talking about them, but I'm really bad at explaining them. So a breaking point in Chronicles of Darkness in general is anything that could... Gosh, I'm sorry. It's essentially a psychological stressor. So it can cause you to lose integrity. It's kind of used to be the hierarchy of sins morality thing.
Okay.
But now they're unique to each character. Different things can provoke breaking points to different people. So for somebody like, let's just say if you're playing regular Chronicles of Darkness, just you're playing as humans. So for me, if I was playing a character that was pretty much myself, if I stumbled upon a mutilated corpse in an alley, I'd probably freak out. But if I were a veteran homicide detective, I probably wouldn't. So it can be a little bit different. But when you the actual mechanic is that when you hit one, you roll resolve plus composure, and then you also have a modifier that's based on your current integrity, humanity, any other modifiers. And if you fail, you lose a dot of your integrity, and you get a condition. And so conditions can be, you're catatonic, you are actually temporarily insane. There are all kinds of different things that can happen.
You can't focus anymore. You're crying randomly.
Yeah. And if you succeed on a breaking point, then you gain a beat, which translates to experiences, and you also gain willpower. So yeah, it's something that is very important to all of our game lines as far as Chronicles go. But I think that having things like that in Vampire is really important in Requiem. Sorry, I'm not talking well all of a sudden.
No, that's fine.
Mostly because, like I said, what might be a breaking point for one person might not be another. So let's say that someone's touchstone is in peril. So for the person whose touchstone is being, let's say, tortured, that might cause a breaking point for them, but not to the other members of their group. But
so it sounds like the arc again. I'm always fascinated with character arcs in role playing games because it's something that I think that works really well. So if you're playing a mortal, you have mortal breaking points, but as you slowly become to adapt to the vampiric condition, you start to replace those with vampiric ones as you deal. Like, for example, the sight of blood might be really horrible when you're a mortal, but when you're a vampire, eventually you have to get over that.
Yeah. So like that would no longer cause a breaking point once you're a vampire. But, seeing a horribly mutilated body might still be a breaking point for you, because maybe you still don't deal with that very often. But then, as you gain power or do more horrible things, that might become more normal to you. And that's one of those balancing acts that you have to kind of play with.
And that's really kind of interesting, because I know when Rose wanted to kind of move into second edition, there's always been a noir detective tradition.
Rose is super into noir.
Yeah, well, so am I, and that's one of our many bonding points, is that she and I both love noir. And I know she actually started off second edition with a quote from Raymond Chandler, and I was just like, yes, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me because my argument has always been that in various different detective traditions, the British detective tradition is about, largely speaking, this is very kind of oversimplifying an entire genre, is about the puzzle.
Right.
The Sherlock Holmes, the Agatha Christie, it's how did this murder happen? The American detective tradition is primarily about people.
Yeah. It's about the detective and the siren and the, woman that comes in and is very mysterious and all those tropes.
Exactly. And as I've told many people, I genuinely love Raymond Chandler. He is one of the writers that has inspired me, but his actual mysteries are kind of crap.
Yeah.
Because it's not about the mystery. It's about what kinds of social relationships Philip Marlowe navigates to get to resolve the problem, to resolve the issue. Mm-hmm. And that may not be solving the mystery necessarily. It usually is, but it's not necessarily what's happening. So the mapping of Requiem to the noir American detective tradition is fascinating to me, because it's a similar idea. You start off as someone who is inside society, and slowly those bonds break to where you have become an outsider, and you need to be an outsider to have that perspective. It's a similar tradition of gunslingers and samurai. The outsider has to come into an established community in order to enact justice. In this case, it's the vampire is an outsider to the community, comes in to instill horror. But the horror is both internal and external simultaneously, which is, again, fascinating to me, because Masquerade was always a game of personal horror. And I think that's true. I genuinely think Masquerade is a game of personal horror, whereas Requiem blurs the line of how much does that personal horror impact the world around you.
Right, and also impact yourself as a person.
Because if you hit that breaking point, you frenzy, you kill your touchstone, it becomes a cycle of internal horror begets external horror, which begets more internal horror.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, that's why the whole noir genre is so fascinating to it, and that's why if you read Chronicle Second Edition, just the core book, it's very missing persons case and maybe ghosts, but it doesn't really get super supernatural, to be redundant. But yeah, so because like that's really where a lot of Rose's influence came from. She had actually had a chat about that a while back, because I'm not a big noir detective story fan. Like, I was always more of a Agatha Christie, Sherlock Holmes person, because I read them for the puzzles. So getting her perspective on that, and getting her perspective that so much of it is detective stories on some level, but it's the detective stories where the detective is also the, drunk who lost his wife and is struggling with that as much as he is struggling with the case itself, is really interesting, because I kind of didn't get that at first, because I'm not familiar with the genre. And then it was after I talked to her that I kind of went, oh, no, that makes perfect sense. Okay, I can see it all over the place now.
And that's something that she talked about, is because Masquerades initially, over time, evolved closer to the British detective tradition, because it's really about, okay, who is manipulating me, and who do I have to manipulate to get out of this larger plan, and it's wheels within wheels within wheels. And so the uncovering of the conspiracy is a lot of the fun of a Masquerade game, which by its design means you start to pull away from the mortal world, the mundane concerns, whereas Requiem is so heavily grounded in it.
Obviously, a storyteller doesn't have to go that route, but it certainly seems to be leaning toward it with subsequent releases, probably from around the tail end of second edition onwards. But one thing I just wanted to say on the subject of noir
Mhm.
and inspiration is a series probably very few people listening to this have watched. It's a Canadian series. I have no idea whether it's available in America. And it's called 19-2, 19-2. It's a cop show, and it's like, I think, Precinct 19, Squad Car Number 2, or Rotation 19, Squad Car Number 2, and it's just a pair of cop partners. And in the same way as Detective Noir focuses entirely on the characters and their relationships, their downfalls and successes, and the ramifications of what they do, this show lingers very barely on any crime. It just follows the characters from, well, on their beat. They are the lowest form of police. You know, they are squad car operatives. They go from crime scene to crime scene. Sometimes they just have to secure it and stand there waiting for coroners to turn up. Other times they've got to raid houses because there's been a report of domestic violence or noise complaint and the like. And they range from the mundane to the severe. But it focuses entirely on character arcs, and so I absolutely love it. It's concluded now after 4 seasons, but it's something I recommend absolutely anyone checks out. It's a brilliant series. It's available in both French, Canadian, and English. The English version was adapted, as far as I'm aware, line for line, and in some cases shot for shot from the French Canadian version. Both filmed in Montreal, including some of the same cast. And while the French version finished 2 seasons in, the English one ran for 4. Which actually came out subsequent to the French-Canadian one. But anyway, I know this is somewhat of a digression, but for me, recently running Requiem 2nd edition, that show, which doesn't seem like it would be the most obvious inspiration, has been. And in fact, I blame you, Eddy, because you sent me a gift. You sent me a Raymond Chandler novel, and that really sort of reignited my love of noir. And then I stumbled upon this series, the first 2 seasons of which are on Amazon Prime in the UK, and thought, wow, it never signposts itself as noir. It never really says this is a personal horror or tragedy drama. It just says this is a Canadian cop show.
Right.
But you watch it, and it's got so many layers. It's utterly brilliant. Probably one of the best series I've ever watched. So, yeah. And actually... Oh, sorry, no, Eddy, you carry on.
No, I was going to say is like I think one of the worst things that you can do modern day when you're writing a noir story is to signpost as noir or neo-noir. One thing that, again, Rose and I kind of agree on is one of the better noir stories is Brick. It's a great movie, but it's not. It's only been in subsequent releases that the word noir has cropped up around it because other people have recognized it as the tropes of noir. In fact, it's structured much like a Raymond Chandler novel, but it's about high school kids. Veronica Mars is another example where it has a lot of the structure of noir, but it's only been afterwards that people have applied that label to it. So I thought it was interesting that Rose kind of took that more aggressive approach. But in a role-playing game, you kind of have to put your influences more on your sleeve to get people to recognize what's going on.
Right.
So I mean, I think you're right in the sense that most people wouldn't necessarily think, hey, this cop show is going to be a connection. But at the same time, first edition Requiem heavily name dropped The Wire as an influence.
Yeah.
So it is in that the DNA is there.
I'd like to focus a little on powers, because we've spoken an awful lot about, I guess, the personal horror of Requiem. But a lot of people play these games to play superhumans, to be quite frank. You are playing characters who have abilities that the rank and file do not. One of the things I particularly enjoy about Requiem 2nd Edition, this is something we tried to do a lot with V20 Dark Ages as well, is ensure there is no redundancy in powers. And I think Requiem 2E does this very well. I'll be interested to hear if either of you have noticed this, but to use a golden example, the discipline of obfuscate, which has been present in every single edition of every single vampire game, the ability to melt away into the shadows, change your appearance, and so on. In previous editions, the first level would be if you stand still in a dark corner, no one can see you. Second level would be if you move around in the dark, no one can see you. And third level would be everyone's favourite Mask of a Thousand Faces. You can change your appearance, and there you go. Now, the problem with that tiering of power was as soon as you reached the third level, there was no point to using the previous two. Whereas with other disciplines, some other disciplines anyway, there was utility at every single level. Requiem Second Edition's Disciplines chapter is a wonder to me. It's something I go back to. I've gone back to a lot with Contagion Chronicle, in fact, in a sense, trying to pull from Requiem in the way it's structured, because even as a walloping great blood potent Nosferatu with insane levels of obfuscate, or a Mechet with insane levels of obfuscate, you will still be relying on the first level a lot, because
they all do different things.
Exactly, every single power is different, and it's to be honest, it's quite subtle the way this change has occurred. I don't think we've ever really gone out of our way to advertise that we do this now with our games, but when you have a grab bag of powers and at no point are any of the early levels pointless, that to me is the sign of excellent game design, because at that point your character has this cornucopia of powers and can just can rely on their old faithfuls, or they can start delving into the new things they've excitedly bought with their experiences. And that almost to me is why the second editions of Chronicles of Darkness games are such a success in my mind. I guess it's because when I read them, I look at the powers and I think, wow, there's so many different ways I can use every single level here. But I don't know whether you've had cause to notice anything like that, any of the new options, I guess, that you get in Requiem second edition.
I will say that I do know that was definitely intentional, because there's been a few times where, again, because I was working on V20 roughly at the same time, so there was lots of conversations between Rose and I about things like, okay, how do we make Auspex distinct between these two games? How do we make Obfuscate distinct between these two games? But one thing that I remember specifically we kind of talked about was I use wolf claws as an analogy, is the fact that wolf's claws is a lot of times people will in Masquerade buy off-discipline powers to get to a certain point because they need a certain thing. Wolf's claws is a very common one.
Yeah.
I don't know how many games I've played in where it's like, I'm going to get my gangrel friend to teach me a couple dots of protein so I get the wolf's claws so I can do ag, and then I'm done. That's all I need. I don't need to do any of the other stuff. I want that specific power. Whereas no one goes for just, like you say, 1 dot of obfuscate. It's always like, okay, I need to get to 3 dots. So there comes these kind of sweet spots in design, and that to me is also interesting in a certain way. If you have the separate conceit of it's okay if some powers are not as good as others, and how you spread those powers out because of the XYZ design of Chronicles Darkness, you can't really rely on that. You have to make sure every combination is inherently interesting, which means you've got to go to every stopgap is inherently useful in some situation. So some of that I think came from the nature of the setting kind of informing the power design. And part of that, I know it didn't quite happen as much in first edition, but also to be perfectly honest, first edition was a very tumultuous development cycle.
Right.
It was done very, very rapidly. It was like in only 1 year to reinvent entire worlds. There was a lot of concerns about how to pitch that. I know Rich talked about that to a certain degree in his interview about how what the company needed out of it and what the game needed, and there's a lot of people inputting at the same time. So it's natural that Requiem's going to be a little more conservative when it's a first game out of the gate and this whole new concept, where second edition can kind of say, okay, no, let's think through the ramifications of having a society where any kind of bits and pieces can be snapped together. How does that impact power design? So it's interesting to me that, Matthew, that you've recognized that as designers, say, hey, I've noticed this very specific trend, because absolutely I know that was in Rose's minds. And whereas with me, a lot of my work on V20 was much more along the lines of how do I take these interesting moments and make them a little more playable. And with Dark Ages, you guys were able to kick that a little bit further, because Dark Ages is its own little kind of weird bubble of World Darkness. But with second edition, to see that more systemically stamped out in this design perspective was really, really exciting for me to see.
Yeah, no, and I mean, there's a lot of games that kind of do the thing we were talking about before, where once you get the second level of a power or the third version of a power or whatever, you kind of quit using the first one, or you quit using the first two.
Right away.
Yeah, exactly. Because you start out and you've got these first level spells, and like if you're playing a 9th level character, like how often are you really casting magic missile? Like not all that often, you know. And so that's kind of what Masquerade did originally. And yeah, I definitely remember making all these characters back in the day and kind of being like, well, I've got to get to this level so I can mind control, or I've got to get to this level so I can turn to a bat, you know. And with Obfuscate as the example, like level 1 is hiding yourself in plain sight, so you're still going to be using that. And then I think level like 5 is where you can hide an entire like building or place, but you might not always need to use that one. You know, you don't need to just turn that one on all the time. That might be a very special occasion.
Extremely powerful in very specific circumstances.
Yeah, but then you can also, I think second level is like touch an object and make it vanish, essentially. So yeah, like those are different situations, and so different situations call for different powers or different abilities. And so they actually made all those abilities useful for different situations. And you will see that in pretty much all of the, you know, Chronicles 2e games, is that there are a bunch of different powers, but none of them ever get useless, in my opinion.
No.
Which is cool.
And actually, since we're getting close to time, the modular nature of it is a nice kind of final touch point. With Masquerade, the clans ultimately stem from some form of what is this iconic vampire trope that we can then emulate through the clan, whereas with Requiem we went kind of a different direction. The clans are more even distilled vampire tropes, but then the covenants kind of bring their own separate relationship to it.
Oh yeah.
So I'd like each of you, if you can, to kind of mention what you think is the most interesting combination of clan and covenant in Requiem, and then also if it's different, your personal favorite combination. Matthew, why don't you start?
Ooh, okay, that's an interesting question. That's your curveball, because I wasn't expecting anything like this.
Vengeance.
Okay. So my most interesting combination, I suppose, I have always enjoyed putting Nosferatu in positions of power. I find it makes for an interesting city, because the wonderful thing about Requiem is the clans, although they don't have the codified history they do in Masquerade, they have a very strong identity. That's my feel. So if you have a Nosferatu prince, a Nosferatu Invictus prince, that tells you something about the city. So to use the Masquerade example, Nosferatu prince and the Camarilla, that might tell you something about the city, but it's more likely to tell you something about the clan or the Camarilla. Or the weakness of other clans. In Requiem, I feel that if you have a Nosferatu prince, a strong Nosferatu Invictus presence, that's really telling you something about how creepy the city is, how fucking weird and terrifying it is, because this is not a clan that relies on subtlety of discipline in Requiem with disciplines like Nightmare. They are holding on to power through terror. So I find that a particularly interesting combination. In terms of my personal favourite to play, I'm very boring in this regard. I always go back to Ventru. It doesn't matter which version of Vampire I'm playing. But I enjoy the outright control method of Ventrue in Requiem, because unlike in Masquerade, they have animalism. So they aren't just about controlling the bipedal mortals wandering around, they're also about controlling the world, basically, and everything that is living in it. So you can play a very interesting Ventrue control freak that wants to control his blood, wants to control his faith, and so I like the idea of a Ventrue that's quite mercenary and is quite happy to hop between covenants depending on how old he is and what his whims are and what his needs are. So maybe when he started out, he was an idealistic Carthian until he got to the top of the food chain there and jumped the Invictus by selling out the rest of his coterie. And then he decided, my humanity is dropping down to the doldrums, so I'm going to embrace the Loncaer et Sanctum to preserve what little I've got left, and so on. I think that would be my personal preference. So what about you, Dixie?
I think it's interesting to compare the kind of seductive vampire aspect of the Deva, which are that's my favorite clan from the Requiem, just so you know. But they are the they're the sexy seductive vampire tropes. They have a tendency to get addicted to like one person's blood. They are very much intertwined with the notions of obsession and lust. And so I think it's really interesting if you put one of them in either the Ordo Dracul or the Loncaer, because then you have this either scientific or religious thing going on that you would think would take precedence. So being able to play or to show that kind of war between like your own personal like lust for a person or obsession for a thing, mixed with wanting to actually, either further these scientific or religious theories you adhere to, I think is really, really interesting, because that really does make a great like conflicted character to me.
Absolutely. And for me, I'll actually get to our obligatory wrestling reference through this one.
Oh no.
Thank you, Eddy.
I actually do think, weirdly, that the Ventrue Invictus combination is the most definitive of Requiem, because it is the one that looks on the surface to be the most stereotypical from Masquerade. But when you think about what Ventrue are doing in Requiem, it gives you a completely different spin. The two factors that always resonate: one is the insanity that's built into the Ventrue, the blending of those two, the Malkavians and the Ventrue into what the Ventrue are in Requiem.
Yeah.
You get the kind of Nero-esque arc of the leader who eventually goes insane. But also because they're the youngest clan in Requiem, they're always kind of trying a little too hard. And that gives them a really interesting tension. And my favorite example of this is my wife Michelle, for one of the LARPs we played in. She played a Ventrue Invictus who was a professional wrestler. She got the shiny jacket, the boots, very 80s style glow female wrestler. And her head was that all of this vampire shtick was just an angle. It was just, for some reason, this group of wrestlers decided they were all vampires, and that there's a long history of vampire concepts in professional wrestling for some strange reason. And this is kind of a bit of a comedy gimmick, but over time, the character evolved because the ruthless stuff you do in a wrestling federation to get over and to get yourself ahead and to make yourself be recognized maps really, really well to vampire society. And so the horrible, ruthless things she did, while under the guise of, I'm just a 80s era professional wrestler, haha, look at me. Then she got away with so much stuff as a result. Really kind of showed me that that's not a character that makes as much, it doesn't slide to creepy in a Masquerade game the way it can and does in a Requiem concept. Because this woman is genuinely insane and is doing horrible things, but you kind of almost have to laugh at it.
Yeah.
My personal favorite combination, though, is Gangrel and Loncaer et Sanctum. For kind of similar reasons, like you mentioned, Dixie, is the religion, or at least religion that the Loncaer et Sanctum is trying to emulate, is very much about trying to be a person that is recognized as good, or at least part of the status quo of society. And the Gangrel clan is very much the opposite of that. And so I found a lot of interesting tension to be found with that. How do you follow your bestial instincts, or do you follow these explicit external creeds and religious directives? Which of those take precedent? And it's like, if you follow one, you're violating the other, and so you're always at this kind of moral tension in the middle of your character.
Mm-hmm.
And again, to me, that strikes me as something that's really fascinating about the taking two bits and putting them together elements. You have these interesting concepts that the game reinforces and gives you kind of texture for. So those two both kind of show to me what can be very, very interesting and compelling about not only Vampire the Requiem, but the design of the Chronicles of Darkness. And with that, start to wrap things up. Matthew, where can people find you online to talk more about Vampire the Requiem?
They can find me online on the Onyx Path forums under the name of The Gentleman Gamer. They can find me on YouTube under the name of The Gentleman Gamer. And they can find me on Twitter under the name of Clack Click Bang. And they can find Vampire the Requiem 2nd edition and other books we've mentioned, such as Half Damned and 1,000 Years of Night, on drivethrurpg.com.
Dixie?
You can find me on almost all social media at Dixie Cyanide. Dixie like my name, Cyanide like the poison. I know I say it that way every time, but someone always gets confused.
It's me. I get confused.
And you can find me at most every social media website at Eddy Fate, EDDYFATE, or my website, eddyfate.com, which does include a page linking all of the projects I've worked on, including my Vampire the Masquerade projects. So with all that said, thank you guys very much for this detailed dig into Vampire the Requiem. And as always...
Yeah, I think it went well.
Yeah, it definitely went well. And as always, many worlds, one Pathcast.